Okay, now we're going to talk about the Vav-Consecutive form. We talked about this quite a bit at the intensive, so I won't go over a lot of the theology or a lot of the inner workings of it, but I just want to remind you of a lot of what I said and give you a couple of examples. You'll recall that the Vav-Consecutive is the form that's used to tell stories. I prefer to think of it as the narrative tense, or the narrative aspect. And so the language that we use here at the seminary in residence course is that the Vav-Consecutive is the mesaper form. Mesaper being a PL participle of the root samech, pei, resh. You can hear that, mesaper, se-pa-ra. And that's the word to tell or to recount. And so the mesaper is the recounter or the teller, or it's the modern Hebrew word for narrator, the one who tells a story. And it is the form that is used throughout the Hebrew Bible every time a story is told. Anytime anyone moves into a narrative mode of discourse, this is the verb form of choice. And because narrative is so pervasive throughout the entire Hebrew Bible, even aspects of the Hebrew Bible that are not narrative literature still have narrative elements to it because there's a speaker who's recounting something. In those cases, it's still used. It's used a lot of times even throughout the prophets, for instance, and in certain places even in the Psalms. So it's a pervasive verb form, and it's very, very theologically interesting, grammatically interesting, culturally interesting, and I think really helps to understand who the people of Israel were and how they thought, particularly about time and how time relates to the presence of God and the experience of God's presence in worship. I.e. sacred time, which has a lot to do with why the stories were told in this particular verb form. So here is what the Vav-Consecutive is. With Vav-Consecutives, you have an imperfect form, which is to say you have a three-letter root onto which a prefix has been added at the beginning, right? So you have a form that is imperfect, which is to say it's translated generally in English as being future tense or perhaps present tense. In other words, incompleted or unperfected yet, imperfect. So for instance, let's take the word yichtov. He is writing, or he will write. Yichtov. Okay, I've got my prefix here. This will review our verb stems. I've got my prefix here in the yod, followed by a hirik under the prefix and a shava under the first root letter, closing the syllable, which creates the dagish lene in the tav, which is a begad kafat letter. So it takes a dagish only when it follows a closed syllable, which this is closed. Yich tov. I got a holum between the second and third root letters. Therefore, the hirik followed by a shava, closing the syllable, holum between the second and third is pa'al. Pa'al, imperfect. Okay? So I have my pa'al imperfect, yichtov here, and this would be translated he writes or he will write. Now, the way that the Vav-Consecutive is created is by adding a Vav. That's why it's called Vav-Consecutive. The Vav part of the name is because of the addition of a Vav. Oops, that's a little too long. The Vav is, let's write that up. The Vav is attached to the very beginning of the word, as the conjunction always is at the beginning of a word. But there are three very important signs of the Vav-Consecutive. The most important one is the Vav itself, but after the Vav is the vowel Patach. Vav, followed by Patach, and then a Dagesh forte in the prefix. Okay? Dagesh forte in the prefix. Those three signs are all very important, essential signs of the Vav consecutive. So when you think of Vav consecutive, think of this. Vav, Patach, Dagesh forte in the prefix. The following. So this isn't a Shurik Vav, right? There's a gap there. This Dagesh forte is in the first root, or not the first root letter, in the prefix. Okay? So you see those three signs here. I'm making so much trouble about these three signs so that you'll know the difference between when you have a Vav consecutive and when you simply have an imperfect form with a Vav. So, and he will do this, and he will do that. If you have a couple of Vavs connecting future actions to each other, that will be a Vav with a Shava and no Dagesh forte. Here we have Vav, Patach, Dagesh forte. Those are the three signs, Vav consecutive. Now what a Vav consecutive actually does is it takes this imperfect future form and it reverses the tense. It reverses the relationship that this form has to time. So as an imperfect future form, you add a Vav, Patach, and Dagesh forte, and it becomes a past tense. The tense then used to tell stories. So that's the Vav part. The Vav creates it, but the reason they call it a Vav consecutive is because this form is used in the context of stories to narrate consecutive events. Okay, so, and he went here, and he found this, and he said, and he responded, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so consecutive events in a story are narrated using this form. So that's the consecutive of Vav consecutive. Okay, one other part grammatically that is important to keep in mind is that the Vav consecutive form sometimes will reduce the vowels or the length of a word. So for instance, from Genesis 1, which we did here during the intensive, you have the verb haya, which is the verb to be. Right? Hey, yod, hey is the root. If you add a prefix to that, a yod prefix, you've got yod, hey, yod, hey. Ye, he, yay. So because of the gutturals and weak letters involved here, this is typical of a pa'al prefix, but this the vowel between the second and third root letter, which is usually a holum, because of the hey, they don't want to end with a holum, so they do a segol instead. Yihye, yihye. That's your third masculine singular imperfect pa'al form for the root hey, yod, hey. Okay, it's a mouthful. Now, if you make this into an mesa pair form, you add your vav, and you add your patach, and the whole thing reduces. So the final hey falls off, which means the final yod becomes a vowel instead of a consonant, and you get this lengthened form, and the emphasis, the accent here is on the end, and the initial vowel reduces. And you've got vayehi, vayehi. Now because there's a shava here, you can't have the Dagesh forte and the yod. You don't have to remember all this stuff. I'm just giving you an example to show you the evolution of a word that will appear in every single narrative that you encounter in the Hebrew Bible. I would almost guarantee you for the rest of your life. This is the King James Version, and it came to pass. in most other translations, and it happened, or and it was. Okay? This is a pervasive form throughout the Old Testament. Vayehi, Vayehi, Vayehi. And you heard it a whole bunch of times in Genesis 1 as I was reciting that to you throughout the intensive. So, God says, Yehi or, let there be light. And the narrator comes in and says, Vayehi or. Right? Let there be light, and there was light. Okay? So, I just wanted to show you how this word comes about. You don't have to remember how all the vowels change and all that sort of stuff at this point. Just remember, sometimes when you have a mesa pair or a Vav-Consecutive form, there is a reduction, usually just a reduction of vowels. So for instance, in the he feel, in the previous video, the video for last week, I was talking about sometimes the hirik yod of the he feel between the second and third root letters reduces to a tsere. Maybe you'll remember that. That happens in the Vav consecutive or mesa pair form. You won't find a hirik yod between the second and third root letters in the mesa pair. In the mesa pair, it'll be reduced to a tsere. So that's just an example of some of the things that happen when you have a Vav consecutive. Okay, so just to review, Vav consecutive takes a Vav with a patach and generally a dagesh forte in the prefix. It's added only to an imperfect form, and it reverses the translation from a future to a past, which suggests that Israel told their stories in the present tense, in the imperfect form, which suggests that they believed that the past did not exist only in the past, but rather in the context of worship, as the stories are being retold, they are, in a sense, still happening, evolving. They're happening in the present tense. So the past is not over and done, but rather in God's presence, sacred time reactualizes the past event in the present moment, creating a new gateway into a new future based on this moment from the past made alive again in a new now.